The movie opens with an ex-cowboy named Michael. He was having breakfast with his wife, Eleanor Love, and son, Nat Love, at their home in Texas. There is a knock on their door, and he is surprised that the knocker is Rufus Buck, one of the cowboys. Michael is confused to see him and why he came, as he was the leader of a gang of thieves and they are very cruel, and they did not hesitate to kill anyone to get what they want. Michael tried to stay calm and let Rufus sit with them at the dining table. Rufus sits down, places his 2 golden pistols on the table, and points his gun at Nat. Moments later, one of his men, who has a scorpion tattoo on his hand, grabs Nat's shoulder, indicating that Michael's family is in danger. He begged him to let his family live in peace, but he killed Eleanor. Michael tried to stop him but was shot in the head and killed in sight of his son, who was screaming hysterically, and then slashed Nat's forehead in the shape of a cross many years later while Nat was praying in church. A man named Cortez, who has a scorpion tattooed on his hand, enters. He was happy to see him as he had been traveling for years looking for the man with that tattoo. As soon as Cortez sees the sign of the cross on Nat's forehead, he panics, but Nat aims his gun at Cortez and kills him without hesitation. On the other hand, a member of the Nat gang named Bill Pickett was seen chasing a group of thieves, and with him was Jim Beckworth, who came to his aid. After they eliminated all the thieves, one of them remained, Monroe Grimes, and he told them that this gang is part of Rufus' gang, and he also told them that if anyone dared to mess with the members of Rufus' gang, that means they would be killed. They decided to leave Monroe alive and take him to their base. That night, Nat is with his girlfriend Mary when Pickett tells him that they have caught one of Rufus' men. He immediately went to him and threatened him, and he demanded that he tell him where Rufus was. He tells him that Rufus is currently in prison in Texas, but his sentence expires tomorrow, and because he told him the truth, Nat decides to release him. The next day, Rufus is about to be transferred to another prison by train, so his men plot to help him. Trudy was one of Rufus' girls who stood in the middle of the tracks confidently on her horse to stop the train. The driver quickly stops the train, but when he gets out to force her off, she shoots him. When Rufus' men entered the train, one of the guards pointed a gun at them, but one of Rufus' men named Cherokee threatened that his men would kill all the passengers if they were not allowed to take Rufus. The guards and men surrendered for fear of putting the passengers in any danger. Cherokee takes the guard hostage, and because of the gang's tough reputation, the warden decides to open the door and free Rufus. After Rufus got out of the detention box and breathed the air of freedom, Rufus' men bombarded all the police officers in that place. Rufus casually walked out of the train. After the cruelest cowboy in Texas rejoined his gang, they rushed to their hideout base in Redwood. It was a small town built by Rufus using the looted money he had accumulated over the years. The town had grown quite a lot since Rufus left a few years ago. In Redwood, a man named Wiley Esco had also been waiting for Rufus. He was one of Rufus' men assigned to lead the city while in prison. When Rufus went to the bank to collect the money that his men had robbed so far, the bank staff informed him that all the money that was robbed by Rufus' men had run out. The bank clerk told him that Rufus' crew had been robbed 2 days ago by some mysterious cowboys in the Texas hills. All the money they robbed had been taken by them. Hearing this, Rufus understood that every robbery attempt they carried out did not always go smoothly, but he was still confused by the bank staff who said that the money Rufus said Rob had been used up. Before he was imprisoned, he had saved $25,000 in the bank. Rufus immediately realized that the person who had taken all the money was Wiley. He immediately went to see Wiley to ask for the money back. Rufus arrived at Wiley's place and asked about the $25,000 in cash. Wiley casually said that all the money had been used to finance their group's activities. Wiley felt he was in control of the city, so he revealed his plan to sell the city to white businessmen and expel all black people there. Hearing Wiley says all that arrogantly and confidently, Rufus becomes very angry and disappointed in him. He had trusted Wiley to take care of the city while he was away. Rufus, who did not accept Wiley's betrayal, challenged Wiley to a one-on-one duel without using any weapons. Even though Wiley was the one to take the first strike, Rufus was able to easily dominate the fight. He seriously injured Wiley with just a few hard punches to his face. After Rufus wins the fight, he decides not to kill Wiley. He lets him leave the city alive because Wiley used to help him build the city. That night, when Nat was relaxing at a bar, a sheriff named Bass Reeves came up to his table and asked him to talk. Members of Nat's gang who were also at the bar began observing what the sheriff was doing with their boss from a different table, but shortly after that, Nat suddenly thou Sheriff Bass with a beer. He pointed a gun at Nat's gang members, saying he would take Nat to the police station for questioning. He was suspected of robbing a bank that asked his men to stay calm and let the sheriff take him away because he was sure he could handle the problem alone. The following morning, Sheriff Bass and Nat had gone quite far from the base of Nat's gang. He suddenly stopped his train in the forest and told Nat to get off. Nat's arrest last night was apparently part of Sheriff Bass and Nat's plan to take Nat away from his gang. He wanted to ask Nat's help to kill Rufus. Bass was a sheriff who was previously assigned to investigate the murder case Rufus committed against Nat's parents. This time Bass wanted to allow Nat to take revenge on Rufus. Nat purposely asked Sheriff Bass to remove him from his gang because he did not want to involve them in his personal affairs. Nat did not want to put them all in danger to fulfill his intention of revenge against Rufus. As it turns out, all of Nat's gang members and a bar owner named Cuffy had been secretly following Sheriff Bass's train all night to find out what the sheriff would do to Nat. Seeing their sudden arrival, Matt intended to explain why he was doing all that, but Pickett immediately interrupted Nat's conversation and said they had heard the talk between that and Sheriff Bass. Kickett and the others have agreed to help Matt attack Rufus and his gang. They knew that Rufus' gang was a group of ruthless and dangerous criminals. What's more, they had all been family a long time ago, so it would be better if they fought and died together instead of fighting and dying alone. Seeing the sincerity that Pickett and the others had, that had no choice but to let them get involved in this revenge plan. On the other hand, Trudy gathered all the residents of Redwood and told everyone that Wiley had secretly mortgaged Redwood to white business people. They had to work together to pay off all their debts. Given that Rufus and his gang didn't have enough money, then they asked all residents to help pay a fee of $50,000 for each house, so white businessmen did not take over their city. One of the residents raised his objections to pay the dues. Without the slightest hesitation, Rufus shot the man to death in front of all the Redwoods. He said he didn't care how they got the money, but Rufus wanted them to pay the dues of the funds as soon as possible. If they refused, then their family would die at his hands. Meanwhile, Nat's gang and Sheriff Bass meet in the middle of the force to discuss their plan to bring down Rufus. On the sidelines of the conversation, they accidentally met Wiley. He was about to flee to the opposite town after he was evicted from Redwood town. Sheriff Bass, who knew Wiley was the mayor of Redwood, immediately arrested him. He interrogated Wiley to dig up more information about Rufus and his gang. Wiley warned Nat and his group not to invade Redwood without proper preparation or planning because Rufus and his group would kill them all in no time. Wiley suggested that one of them impersonated a businessman and offered to buy a bar in Redwood so Rufus did not suspect them. Given that Rufus and his gang currently needed a lot of money to pay off the property debts of Redwood, Wiley believed that Rufus would be happy to accept the offer. In that way, the attention of Rufus and his gang would be temporarily diverted. Nat's group could infiltrate Redwood town and start their attack. Hearing Wiley's brilliant idea, Nat invited Wiley to work with his group to take revenge on Rufus. He believed that Wiley also wanted to do the same thing to Rufus. In the evening, Mary went to Redwood to meet Rufus. She negotiated to buy a bar in Redwood as the plan they had prepared, but during the negotiations, Mary accidentally mentioned the robbery that happened to Rufus' men the other day. It made Rufus feel suspicious is because news about the robbery had not yet spread widely. Rufus knew that Mary was a member of the cowboys who had robbed the loot belonging to his men. He ordered Trudy to hit Mary on the head until she fainted. The following morning, Nat began to worry that Mary had not returned from Redwood after her negotiations with Rufus. He suspected that something terrible had happened to her. Nat and his members decided to follow Mary to Redwood to save her, but when they arrived in the city, Trudy confronted them all. She said that she knew Nat's group robbed Rufus' men a few days ago, and they had taken Mary hostage in retaliation for them. While showing Mary, who was tied up, Trudy asked Nat and his men to return all the money Rufus' men had robbed, along with an additional $10,000 as a penalty for their actions earlier. Trudy threatened they would kill Mary if Natskin could not bring all the money the next day. The following morning, Nat and his gang planned to rob a bank to get a lot of money because it's the only way to earn money quickly. With the experience and skills, Matt was confident they could pull off the robbery easily and use the money to save Mary. Cuffy was then asked to dress like a noble woman to disguise herself as a bank customer. It was she could infiltrate the bank without being suspected by security officers. Tuffy would go with Net and they would pretend to set up a new account at the bank to distract the bank clerk. At the same time, the rest of the gang would wait outside to keep an eye on things around the bank. Upon their arrival at the bank, Cuffy went straight to the teller's counter and said frontally that she was going to commit a robbery at the bank. The teller laughed because she thought that Cuffy was making a joke. Not long after, Cuffy immediately pointed a gun at the teller. At the same time, Nat pointed his gun at the security guard. He could easily intimidate the bank guard, and the guard decided to let Nat go. As a result, according to requests from Trudy and the Rufus gang, Nat and his gang members managed to get a sizable amount of money. After Nat and Cuffy left the bank building and took the money they had stolen, the bank staff quickly set off the theft alarm, and several police officers at the scene immediately ran out and fired several bullets at Nat. Luckily, Pickett immediately backed up not to escape from that place safely with Cuffy. While Nan and the others were counting money in the middle of the forest, Wiley suddenly appeared carrying several weapons and a large supply of ammunition for their future battle preparations. He said he had infiltrated the Rufus armory and managed to steal some ammunition and weaponry from it. After all Nat members had their weapons and equipment, they started preparing to carry out their mission to save Mary from Rufus' hands. Sheriff Bass came first in a horse-drawn carriage and pretended he had brought the money Rufus asked for. At the same time, Rufus was watching his movements from behind the window. Sheriff Bass met with Cherokee, who welcomed him and intended to bring him to meet Rufus. The other members checked the money in Bass's horse-drawn carriage. Once some of Rufus' men approached the carriage, an enormous explosion occurred and some of Rufus' men died in the blast. Knowing this, Cherokee quickly pointed a gun at Sheriff Bass, who at that time said that all of this was just a bluff to make him keep his promise to release Mary. Shortly after that, Nat came riding his horse and moving towards Redwood, followed by Cuffy. She went in a horse-drawn carriage carrying the amount of money requested. Rufus kept watching the movements of Nat and his gang from behind the window, while Pickett and the rest of Nat's gang had spread out in their positions to guard Nat. Nat said he would blow all the money up if they didn't release Mary soon. It left Trudy with no choice but to turn Mary over to Nat. When Nat was about to approach Mary, Cherokee suddenly pointed a gun at him from behind. At the same time, Jim was behind Cherokee and immediately pointed his gun at him. Seeing this situation, Cherokee asked Jim to do a one-on-one duel, but before the countdown was finished, Cherokee cheated and immediately shot Jim in the head until he died. Pickett, who witnessed the incident from the top of the building, was so angry to see his best friend being killed unfairly, he instantly shot a bomb at the pile in the horse-drawn carriage. Seeing all the money burnt, Rufus and his gang get ready to start a deadly fight against Nat and his team. Rufus realized that Nat had intended to take revenge on him from the start. There was a tense shootout between Nat's group and Rufus' gang. Nat managed to dominate the fight and kill most of Rufus' members. In the middle of the battle, Mary chased Trudy, who was running to a farm, and the two immediately fought in that place very fiercely. After a long and tiring struggle between the two brave women, Mary won the battle and Trudy died at her hands. At the same time, Bass and Nat were still fighting against Rufus' remaining men. During the fight, an enemy weapon shot Nat in the shoulder, causing him to fall to the ground when Rufus' men are about to shoot Nat in the head and end his life. Bass instantly shoots the man to death. Nat managed to survive death. Bass then pulled Nat and took him to hide behind a horse-drawn carriage to avoid being attacked by Rufus' men across the road. When he was cornered, Nat recalled his memories of when Rufus came to his house and killed his parents, but deep trauma still haunted Nat to this day. But thanks to that memory, Nat becomes even more determined to be able to take revenge on Rufus. With his badly injured hands, Nat got back up from that slump and started shooting Rufus' men full of anger. In the meantime, Wiley found Rufus to fight against at his hideout, but before Wiley could say anything, Rufus immediately shot a bomb under Wiley's jacket and he died from the explosion. Meanwhile, Pickett and Cuffy, who had managed to infiltrate Rufus' base, intended to kill Rufus' remaining men. Cherokee suddenly appeared and shot Pickett from behind, killing him. Tuffy felt very angry seeing her best friend who had to die in front of her just like that, so she challenged Cherokee to a duel like a real man instead of continuing to act like a coward. Things got tense between the two, but Cuffy got the Cherokee out first with one quick shot. After Cherokee and all of Rufus' men died, Nat met Rufus at his hideout base. He wanted to end all of this with the revenge he had planned. Nat approached Rufus, who was sitting on a chair. He asked Rufus if he still remembered the 10-year-old boy who had to suffer for his whole life because his parents were killed by Rufus. Hearing this, Rufus explained that he did all That because he wanted to take revenge on his father, who had killed his mother and left her. Rufus told him that his father was very abusive and continuously beat him. One day he cruelly killed his mother in front of Rufus without remorse. At that time his mother was just trying to protect little Rufus, who was almost tortured by his father, but his father instead chose to end the life of his wife. He left Rufus after taking all of Rufus' mother's property. After many years, Rufus, who had grown up, finally heard that his father was living happily with his new wife in a small house in the Texas desert. He had a son with his new wife. Hearing that story, Nat looked devastated and did not expect that the father he had known as a kind and loving father was a monster who could destroy his own family. Matt then denied all of this and accused Rufus of lying to him. That could not believe the person who killed his parents was his own brother. Rufus approached Nat and tried to provoke him to immediately kill him. Matt, who was confused, quickly shot several bullets at him. After all the things they experienced, Rufus finally had to die at the hands of his own brother, and that ended up killing his brother. The following day, Nat and his gang buried Jim and Pickett, who had died in the fight. Nat had to continue his journey without the two of them. As everything was over, Coffee returned to managing her bar and Bass resumed his duties as a sheriff while Matt and Mary began their journey together. Here the movie ends. Thank you for watching.